And chief among them is, if you need to use some of your retirement savings in order to buy you some time to get through this pandemic, or you need to access them, is there a way the government can reduce the amount you're taxed for that?
Okay, we'll talk more about that after we hear from the Prime Minister. Here he is. Thanks, Vashi.
Announced a new contribution to support the Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, and the Global Initiative for the Eradication of Polio. These organizations distribute vaccines to the most vulnerable around the world and save millions of lives. More recently, Gavi has been helping developing countries to respond to outbreaks of disease such as COVID-19. Once we have found a vaccine, Gavi will be helping to distribute it to those who need it. This is good news because in our interconnected world, in order to end the pandemic in Canada, we must defeat the virus everywhere.
I want to note that earlier this morning, Minister Gould announced a significant contribution to the Vaccine Initiative, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, and the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. These organizations deliver vaccines to some of the world's most vulnerable, saving millions of lives. Most recently, Gavi is also helping developing countries build capacity to respond to disease outbreaks like COVID-19. Once a COVID-19 vaccine is available, Gavi will help get it to the people who need it. And that will keep us all safer. Because in our interconnected world, to end this pandemic for good in Canada, we have to end it everywhere. Comme on le sait trop bien,
as we know only too well, the last few weeks have been particularly tough for our seniors and their families. Our parents and our grandparents are more at risk of catching COVID-19 and of suffering the most serious consequences. Right across the country, the long-term care homes and seniors' homes have been the most hard hit by the pandemic, exposing the failures of a system that must be strengthened. But the challenges of the pandemic for seniors are not just limited to what's happening in seniors' homes. The lockdown is weighing heavily on seniors right across the country. They spend a lot of time alone and separated from their families. And because they're supposed to not go out as much as possible, they can't use public transit. They rely on delivery services to do their errands, and often that means they can't take advantage of sales in stores. It's hard on their morale as well as on their finances. So today, our government is announcing new measures to help our seniors get through this crisis. First of all, if you receive old age security, you will be receiving $300 more to help you with the costs that you've had to incur as a result of COVID-19. Right across the country, we're talking about almost 7 million people who will be receiving more money in the coming weeks. And to help those seniors who are most vulnerable, we will also be providing an additional $200 to all of those who are eligible for the Guaranteed Income Supplement. That means that if you are receiving both OAS and the GIS, you will receive $500 more. Our government will also be granting $20 million more to the New Horizons for Seniors program. We did make changes to that program several weeks ago to allow organizations to adjust their services based on the realities of the pandemic and help seniors remain in contact with their families. So we are again investing in that program to provide for more activities that will counter the isolation of seniors and improve their quality of life.
Announcing new measures to support seniors during this pandemic. First, if you're receiving old age security, you will get an additional $300 to offset some of the extra costs you've had to cover because of the virus. This means that across the country, almost 7 million seniors will get help that they need. And to better support the most vulnerable seniors, we will also give an extra $200 to people who are eligible for the Guaranteed Income Supplement. So if you're receiving both OAS and GIS, you will get an additional $500 in total to help you. Our government is also investing an additional $20 million in the New Horizons for Seniors program. A few weeks ago, we boosted funding so that organizations could provide delivery services and help seniors stay in touch with family during the pandemic. So we're making another investment today to create more programs to help isolated seniors and improve their quality of life. Now, there's no question that COVID-19 has been taking its toll on seniors both emotionally and financially. And with today's announcement, our government is taking action to alleviate some of the stress they may be feeling. But there's a lot more work to be done, not only to find short-term fixes, but long-term solutions. COVID-19 has exposed some uncomfortable truths about our society, including how we care for seniors in Canada. We've seen heartbreaking tragedies in long-term care facilities and nursing homes right across the country. Overworked staff, understaffed residences, grieving families. There are serious underlying challenges facing these facilities, and in the coming months, the federal government will be there to help the provinces find lasting solutions.
Since this crisis began, we have witnessed heartbreaking scenes in long-term care facilities and seniors' residences across the country. Overwhelmed caregivers, overcrowded residences, and families in mourning. These facilities are facing significant challenges, and in the coming months, the federal government will be there to help the provinces address those challenges.
No matter where they live or what they do, has a role to play in supporting our seniors during this pandemic. It starts with following public health recommendations. You know the drill: staying home, washing our hands, and keeping a safe distance from others when we go out. That's how we can protect the physical health of our parents and grandparents during this pandemic, but let's not forget about their mental health. A lot of people, especially single seniors, are feeling really lonely right now. So call your grandparents, ask them how their day is going, how they're doing, and how you can help. Consider writing a letter or a postcard to isolated seniors, or volunteer with a local organization to fight the isolation of seniors. We need to be there for those who have built this country for the rest of us, and that's what Canadians will continue to do. And together, we will get through this. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phone for questions. One question, one follow-up. Over to you, operator.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Raymond Fillon, TVA. À vous.
Good morning, Prime Minister. With respect to support for seniors, the amounts you are announcing today do not reflect what some groups were asking for. Some people were asking for monthly increases. Is this something that you could do? Similar to what you've done for students. Well, from the beginning of this pandemic, we've known that seniors are the most vulnerable to the impact of COVID-19. And that's why we brought in so many measures as a society to try and protect our parents and grandparents by staying home and by preventing the spread of COVID-19 right across the country. At the same time, we took concrete measures through United Way, through a GST tax credit that helped a lot of seniors. And today we're moving forward again to help these seniors who are feeling a lot of anxiety and having to incur extra costs. But of course, from the very beginning, we have been focused on the people who have lost their income, such as workers who lost their jobs, or students who will not have a summer job this year and be unable to pay their tuition next year. But as you can see, we will be there for everyone, all members of society who need our help, to help them get through this crisis. That's what Canadians do. We help each other, and that continues today.
From the very beginning, we recognized that seniors are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 as a disease. That's why in our exhortations to make sure that everyone stayed home, we often talked about the need to protect our parents and grandparents by slowing the spread of the virus, by keeping people safe. At the same time, we did move forward on direct measures to support most vulnerable seniors through organizations like the United Way, and the GST return that was increased is going to help significantly a large number of seniors. But today, we're announcing more help because we recognize that every week seniors are out of pocket a little bit more for costs of filling medication prescriptions more frequently, or delivery costs for groceries, or other things that they're challenged with, which is why we're stepping up on sending seniors the help they need.
Follow up? With respect to the long-term care facilities, Mr. Singh was saying that private homes should be nationalized. Is this something you're considering? What do you see as a solution for the tragedy we're seeing now in seniors' homes? Simply transferring money to the provinces, or do you feel you should play a more active role as the federal government? Well, first of all, it's not up to the federal government to provide a solution with respect to these long-term care facilities. This falls within provincial jurisdiction. At the same time, we will be there to help and to support the provinces in looking at the various options. I think Canadians right across this country are asking just how we should be looking after our elderly, and in the coming months and years, there have to be improvements. But it will be up to the provinces to determine what needs to be done, and the federal government will be there to support the provinces in terms of the assistance they need and the changes they wish to make.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Lee Berthium, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Yes, Prime Minister. Thanks for talking to us today. The Deputy Prime Minister suggested yesterday that traffic between the U.S. and Canada is bound to increase as states and provinces reopen. What specifically is the government planning to do to deal with an increase in inbound traffic from the U.S., considering the risk of infection?
We're going to continue to be very careful about vectors of infection into Canada. That means continuing with restrictions on international travel. At the same time, we have brought in measures that means anyone coming into Canada, returning residents, particularly, will need to self-isolate for 2 weeks. We are looking at stronger measures to make sure that we're following up appropriately on people come over, because as we know, as economic activity starts to ramp up, as restrictions get loosened across countries, it is likely that we see a few more people either returning home or a few more people trying to cross the border. We need to make sure that the measures that we're bringing forward are going to keep Canadians safe.
Follow up, please.
And given the recovery challenges that lie ahead, is now the time to ensure that all Canadians, especially non-salaried workers, have access to affordable childcare?
I think one of the things that we've seen, particularly when many of the very first jobs lost during this crisis were ones held by women, disproportionately held by women. The need for childcare has never been made clearer. That's why we will continue to work with provinces and municipalities on ensuring that there are affordable childcare spaces across the country. As a government, over the past 5 years, we've made significant investments in childcare, and we will continue to do that. It is a responsibility that we share with the provinces, and we will continue to work with them to ensure that they are able to deliver the kind of childcare that is needed for our society. Okay. Nous reconnaissons à quel point les centres de petite enfance et les garderies sont essentiels pour
daycare centers are absolutely essential for people to be able to work. And the fact is that from the beginning of this crisis, many people have lost their jobs. And of course, when we're going to want to reopen the economy, we will have to ensure that there are enough spaces in child care centers. Now, from the beginning of our first mandate 5 years ago, we were there helping the provinces to provide daycare services, and we will continue to be there and discuss this with the provinces to ensure that we have a better daycare system right across the country.
Prochaine question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Bill Curry, the Globe and Mail. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Your announcement yesterday, your government's big business loan program will require companies to produce reports on how their actions contribute to national climate change goals. The initial reaction from oil and the gas sector was that most large energy companies are already producing reports like this. So is this just a matter of asking companies to maintain their existing level of climate reporting, or are you asking them to do something beyond that? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, as you pointed out, there are many companies in the energy sector that are already taking seriously the need to plan for the longer term, to plan for reducing emissions and fighting climate change, but not all of them. And that's why we needed to make sure that as we move forward on support for large companies across, large employers across all sectors, that they are also in all sectors, not just in the energy sector, thinking about the challenges that climate change will pose to their company and to their future, and have a response for it.
And again, on the loan program, it's clear that large companies that have been convicted of tax evasion don't qualify. But yesterday in your comments, you went further and you said that the government will watch for, quote, aggressive tax avoidance. So what does that mean in practice? Will this rule out companies that use offshore tax havens?
I think Canadians expect that if we're going to be putting taxpayer dollars, public money, towards supporting these companies, that they be paying their fair share of taxes. We recognize that companies have often very complex ways of managing and structuring their revenue and their portfolios. But if they want to apply for the large enterprise emergency financing facility, they are going to have to demonstrate a level of transparency that shows how they organize their structures, so we can make determinations around whether they are indeed paying their fair share of taxes before we put in Canadian money. Okay. We
recognize that many large corporations have different structures in order to minimize the taxes they have to pay, but Canadians do expect that people who are receiving public money should pay their fair share of taxes. So we are demanding a certain amount of openness and transparency from those companies so that they can show us they've paid their fair share of taxes and are not using certain means to try and avoid paying their fair share of taxes. We want to ensure that if they're receiving public money, they are and have been making a proper contribution through taxes.
More questions from the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning,
Vous avez
Mr. Trudeau. You announced a succession of different types of financial assistance for workers, for families, and an improvement to the CCB. There was support for students. Today, it's seniors. Now, how do you explain the fact that seniors have come at the very end of this long list of measures you brought in? No, quite the contrary. We always recognized that seniors were the most vulnerable to COVID-19 because of their health status and their age. And that's why, right from the beginning, we brought in measures to protect them by encouraging people to stay home, not to go and see their grandparents, by helping them through organizations such as the United Way, or giving them more money through a GST tax credit. And we have been there to support seniors. But at the same time, today, we are going even further in supporting them. We will be sending a $300 check to almost 7 million seniors across the country, with a $200 bonus for all of those who are also receiving the guaranteed income supplement, because they are the most vulnerable Canadians. We have to support all sectors of the economy, and we recognized right from the beginning that people who had lost their income or lost their paychecks, or students that would not have a summer job, starting in May, needed help, immediate help from the government. But now we're very pleased to be able to help seniors who are incurring additional expenses, and this will help. Follow-up? Yes, on another subject, with respect to the border between Canada and the U.S., we assume that there are discussions about reopening the border and renegotiating the agreement that goes to May 21st. But in that area, my question remains, will you or will you not reopen the border on May 21st? Well, as you've seen from the very beginning, our discussions with the United States are extremely important in terms of ensuring that restrictions are in place, but also for ensuring that essential goods and services can continue to cross the borders in these difficult times of COVID-19. And that's why we're in constant discussion with the United States on issues such as the border and other shared issues. And I can tell you that those conversations are always very positive and constructive. Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. Seniors are among the most vulnerable people, and they're facing increased costs that they can't necessarily pay. And yet, you're only giving them a one-time payment, a maximum of $500, and some will be receiving less. Why do you think that $500 in your heart, is that enough for our seniors? Well, we know that there are many people out there who have lost their source of income as a result of this pandemic. They've lost their paycheck. Students will not have their summer job. Workers will not be able to make any money that they were relying on in order to pay for their groceries or pay their rent. Seniors are not generally in a situation where they have lost their income, but they are facing additional costs, including additional stress and anxiety because of their health status and their vulnerability to COVID-19. And that's why we recognize that giving them additional help will make a big difference. We're giving $300 to all seniors who qualify for OAS and $200 more for people receiving GIS. But put yourself in the place of a senior who's going to be receiving $500. If that lasts a year, that means $41 a month or $10 more a week. What do you want them to do with so little money? Well, we know that this is an unprecedented situation, and we are taking action now and for the months to come. Obviously, if the situation continues for 6 months or a year, we will have to introduce new measures and have additional reflection on how we're going to support seniors, young people, businesses, workers. The help that we're providing now is short-term help for the emergency we are facing. But as you've seen, as we move forward, we will always be adjusting our action whenever necessary to ensure that people receive the help they need.
One of the things we've seen in this unprecedented situation is we need to remain flexible and support people with what they need when they need it. Obviously, if this continues for another 6 months, for another year, we will have to continue to make adjustments and extend many programs. But right now, what we're looking at is the short-term support that is needed to get Canadians through this so that we can come out the other side and restart the economy soon. And we won't need to look at what we might need to do in 6 months if we're still, heaven forbid, all locked down still. We want to get through this. We want to get through this quickly, but we know we need to support people right now as we get through this, and that's what this extra help for seniors will help with.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. Chinese Canadians, including human rights advocate Anastasia Lin, say community members are under pressure from the Chinese government for their influence networks around the world like United Front. They fear for family members back in China if they speak out, and they also say that they don't have any support here in Ottawa. And I'm just wondering what your government is doing to expose and stop the influence of the United Front here in Canada.
The Canadian government has always highlighted concerns around human rights and respect for basic human democracies and liberties with every country that we engage with around the world, including China. At the same time, we are strong supporters and defenders of the right to free speech, the right to protest, the right to express themselves here in Canada and elsewhere around the world. We will continue to defend human rights while at the same time looking to protect Canadians everywhere around the world, and this is something we'll continue to do.
We've always been very clear in our defense of human rights and freedom of expression and freedom of assembly and freedom of demonstration. And we will always defend the Canadians' rights to do that. In many, many different circumstances, we have defended human rights with the Chinese government.
The agreement to shut down the Canada-U.S. border for essential workers only, allowing only them through, expires next week. A number of provinces like BC and Ontario have said that they don't want that border to reopen. Is there a time period as to how much longer we expect that to be closed, and what's going to be done for the tourism sector that relies so heavily on visitors from the south?
We have every step of the way taken the necessary measures to keep Canadians safe. That has been our priority, and because that has meant negative economic impacts for many sectors across the country, we have moved forward with supports for workers across the country. But our priority needs to be keeping Canadians safe. And that is the spirit in which we have engaged in constant and constructive dialogue with the Americans to talk about shared interests, including the border. And I have no doubt we will have more to say in the coming days on how we continue to move forward in a way that keeps Canadians safe.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. What does Canada need to see on both sides of the border before you consent to allowing non-essential travel?
I think we all are focused right now on ensuring a flattening of the curve, decreasing of the cases of COVID-19 so that we can restart certain sectors of the economy. That must be done gradually. It must be done with tremendous vigilance. And we need to make sure that we have the mechanisms and the materials in place to deal with any further spreads or spikes in COVID-19. Preventing transmission from outside of Canada into Canada once we have controlled the spread within Canada will be an essential part of ensuring that we don't fall back into a second wave that could be as serious as this wave we're going through, or even more so. So we're going to be very, very careful about reopening any international travel, including the United States, before we feel that it is time. Okay. Nous savons que le but de ce que nous vivons maintenant, c'est de protéger
what we're
les
trying to do
Canadiens en
now is protect Canadians
que la COVID-19
by
se répande
preventing the spread of COVID-19 within Canada. As a result, we must control the transmission between Canadians and ensure that in Canada we are massively reducing the number of cases. That being the case, of course, we will be vulnerable to cases coming in from outside, and that's why we'll have to be very vigilant and extremely attentive as to how we can ensure that COVID-19 does not come into Canada and prevent a second wave that is as bad or worse than the one we're in now. So we will be very attentive and be very cautious when it comes to reopening international travel.
Elected Wet'suwet'en chiefs are calling for the resignation of Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett because they say she failed to properly consult with elected leadership over a memorandum of understanding with hereditary chiefs, which they are calling your government to reject. What is your response to these calls from elected leadership, and will the virtual signing scheduled for May 14th of this memorandum of understanding still go ahead?
I want to begin by thanking Minister Bennett for the extraordinary work that she has done over the past months and continues to do on a very difficult issue that has gone on for decades now. The challenges facing the Wet'suwet'en are significant in terms of how they engage and how they work with the federal government, and we will always be there with a partner, to listen, to work with them, and to continue moving forward on the path to reconciliation and partnership.
First of all, I want to thank Minister Bennett for her leadership and for the approach she took in working with the Wet'suwet'en on these very difficult issues that have been around for decades. And as the federal government, we will always be there to work with the community to try and support them and help them to address the challenges they are facing. We know that the path to reconciliation has to go through partnership, and we will be there.
From CTV. On the big business program for lending, yesterday you said that the federal government will be the lender of last resort to these companies who come to the federal government and ask for money. So that means that banks, private investors, pension funds, they will have presumably said no to these companies. We don't want to invest in you. Do you think that the federal government is taking on too much risk if the market has said no to these big companies already?
I think there are big companies in Canada who employ thousands upon thousands of Canadians for whom the concern that private lenders might have of whether or not it is profitable is not the only issue that a government needs to look at. We know that if significant numbers of Canadians lose their jobs for good because of COVID-19, if big employers go under purely because of COVID-19, because they didn't have the liquidity to make it through this, then our economy not only will be worse off, but we'll have even more trouble getting back to normal and coming roaring back. That is why the government has put forward this large employer emergency financing facility to make sure that those companies that if they were to go under because of COVID-19, and impact on the livelihoods of thousands of Canadians for whom it would not be their fault, our government needs to be there. Okay. We
recognize that there are large corporations that employ thousands and thousands of people, and that there would be a long-term injurious effect on our economy if they failed as a result of COVID-19. As a federal government, we have to be there for workers to ensure not only that our economy can come through this, but that it can rebound afterwards. And therefore, we are going to be there to provide liquidity to companies that cannot find that liquidity on private markets, because we know that the impact on the Canadian economy and on workers is just too great to allow them to fail.
You expect that these companies need to be transparent with the federal government in terms of the tax evasion and other things that they've done. Will you commit that the federal government will be transparent about the program itself and make both the terms of the deal and the amount of money that are given to these companies completely public so Canadians can evaluate the deals that your government has done?
Every step of the way, we have been open and transparent about the aid we've put forward during this unprecedented time, and we will continue to share with Canadians the information on what we are doing to make sure that Canadians are kept safe and that our economy is able to come roaring back afterwards. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
All right, that is the Prime Minister.